So yesterday we talked about factoring, pulling out the GCF. You're always supposed to look at polynomials and see if there's anything in common that you could actually pull out when they ask you to factor. That's called factoring out the GCF, right? The greatest common factor. And in addition to that, we also learned factoring by grouping. So let's review both of those. Again, factoring out the GCF, what is it? It's simply pulling out the greatest common value from all the terms of a polynomial. Okay? It's important that we recognize greatest, right? We're talking about the greatest common value from all the terms. All right? It has to be all the terms. You can't just pull it out of 3 and then there's one that you don't pull it out of. You have to pull it out of all the terms. Okay? And factoring by grouping, it's this 3-step process. Step 1 is super easy. You just separate it into 2 groups. Step 2 is to factor out the GCF from each group. And step 3 is rewrite your faceted form? What? Factored form. Sorry, let me change that. Sorry about that. Step 3 is where you take a step back and pull out what's in common from both groups. And you'll have your factored form. Obviously, the steps alone, it might sound kind of confusing. It's once you go through it that it's not that bad. Let's check out the worksheet from yesterday. So let's take a look at number 2. You're always supposed to try and factor out the GCF. Let's zoom in on number 2. So what is the GCF? There's 2 terms. It's a binomial, right? Is there anything in common in the first term and the second term? Yeah, the number 2. So we could pull out a 2. I'm sorry, let me change that. Let's pull out a 2. And if we pull out a 2, what's going to be left on the inside? It's kind of like doing reverse distributed property. That's what factoring is. In other words, 2 times what will take you back to an 8m? 4m, that's right. And then 2 times what gets you back to a minus 6? A minus 3. It's important that we put the minus there because up there it is a minus 6. And 2 times minus 3 is the minus 6. And that's factored form, guys. That's it. You factored out the GCF. Obviously, sometimes you could just pull out numbers the way we did here. We pulled out a 2. Sometimes you'll be able to pull out letters like the R and numbers. And sometimes you'll be able to pull out several letters at once. Let's jump to 11. All right. Why not 11? Let's look at the GCF right there. Okay. Well, let's think. And let's start with the coefficients. The 4, the 16, the 12. What's in common with 4, 16, and 12? 4, right? You could pull out the multiple of 4, from 16, and from 12. And that is the greatest value that you could pull out in terms of the coefficient. So we're pulling out a 4. And in addition to the number 4, the multiple of 4, what else could we pull out? Well, I know that there's a squared here. There's an a here, and there's another a here. So at the very least, I could pull out one of these a's, one of these a's, and one of these a's, and pull them all out. So I'm going to pull out one a in addition to the 4. How about b's? Are there b's in every single term? No. It looks like there's 2 b's here. That's great. Whoops. There's 2 b's here. There's 1 b here, but there's no b over here. So you can't pull out just b's from the first 2 terms. It has to be from all terms. Once again, factoring out the GCF, it's pulling out the greatest common value from all terms. It has to be from all terms. So in that case, we can't pull out the b because the b doesn't exist in the 3rd term. So we're stuck. The GCF is 4a. It's not that we're stuck. It's 4a is the GCF. Now, if I do pull out the 4a, what would be left on the inside of the parentheses? Well, let's take it one step at a time. The coefficient 4 times what coefficient will give me the coefficient 4? 1. So you could put a 1 right there if you want. You don't have to. I'll put a 1. Okay? And now let's go on to the a's. A times what will give me an a squared? A, right? So a times a gives me an a squared. So far I have 1a. And also, I need a b squared right there. So what am I going to put right here? B squared, right? The only way to end up with the b squared up here is if I multiply 4a times 1a with the b squared right there, so the b squared will be up there. So that's my first term. AB squared. You don't even need the 1. And then the next one, it's going to be 4 times what gets us 16? 4 times 4, and it's positive 4, it gives us 16. How about A times what will give me A? I could put a 1 if I want, but that would be pointless. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And how about I also need a B up here in my answer, so I better put a B right here. Does that make sense? Okay. And the last one, 4A times what will give me a 12A? Positive 3. There you go. And we're done. That's factoring out the GCF. Okay? So factoring out the GCF, you always look at all of your terms and see what you could pull out, what's in common, and you want to pull out the greatest common value. What do I mean by greatest? I could have looked at it originally and said, oh, 4, 16, and 12. I could pull out a 2, right? But that wouldn't be the greatest value, so that would be incorrect. You got to pull out the greatest common value, all right? That's factoring out the GCF. Now, if I tried to factor out the GCF right here on number 14, okay, I'm thinking, okay, what's in common with this one, this one, this one, and this one? Okay, there's a B here, there's a B there, there's a B there. That what? Oh, there's no B over here on the fourth one. So I can't pull out a B. Well, maybe I could pull out, there's a 2 here and a 6 here and a 3. Wait, 2, 3, that doesn't, there's not even a coefficient to pull out. So we're actually stuck when we try to factor out the GCF. We cannot pull out a GCF. So that's where we go to the second method that we taught you yesterday, which was factoring by grouping. Okay, so we realize that there's 4 terms, and what we're going to do is separate into 2 groups. All right, we're going to separate it into 2 groups. Let me see if I could move these notes onto the paper itself. Okay, so step 1 is to separate into 2 groups, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write b squared minus 2b, and then I'm going to leave a space, and I'm going to put plus 3b minus 6 over here. I'm separating it into 2 groups. Now, step 2, if you read right here on step 2, it says factor out the GCF from each group. So let's take a look at the first group. Is there anything in common with the first term and the second term on the first group? What could I pull out of there? I could pull out a B, right? So check this out. I am going to pull out a B, and when I pull out that B, what's going to be left in there? A B minus 2. Perfect. Okay, now let's take a look at the second group. What's in common in the second group? What could I pull out of both? A 3, right? Now, if I pull out a positive 3, let me write that down as positive 3, pulling out a positive 3, what would I have left inside the parentheses? B minus 2. Now, at this point, we're really happy because honestly, sometimes these binomials don't end up the same and we're not able to continue factoring. We're stuck. But in this case, I pulled out a B from the first one. I end up with the B minus 2 left over inside. I pulled out a 3 and I'm left over with the same binomial, B minus 2. And that takes us to step 3. And step 3 says, take a step back and pull out what's in common from both groups. So let me write these, let me move this up here. And let's take a look at what's in common in both groups. Well, you have your first group, you have your second group. There's a B minus 2, there's a B minus 2. Let's pull out. Let me take these guys, the binomial B minus 2, and let me pull them out way over here in the front. So let me write down B minus 2, and let me put some exaggerated parentheses here. Now, if I did pull out the B minus 2 from here, moved it out, what's going to be left? Just the B. If I pull out the B minus 2 from here, what's going to be left? Plus 3. And ladies and gentlemen, that is your answer. Obviously, you don't want to leave it with the blank spots right here like I did. I exaggerated these parentheses so you could visually see that the B minus 2's got moved out and now there's nothing there. So let's actually write it with the correct size parentheses, the final answer. That's going to be the binomial B minus 2 parenthesis B plus 3. That is your factored form. Now, what is factoring in reality? It's a reverse distributive property. If I were to distribute B times B, I'd get the B squared that's in the original one. B times 3 and negative 2 times B, that would give me a total of negative 2B and the 3B that's right there. And then the negative 2 times 3, that's negative 6. So this really is the factored form of the original. Okay? Make sense? Okay. And there's actually other ways of doing it, but we're just going to practice factoring by grouping. Okay? Let's try a different one. How about 19? 18. 18. Okay. So, once again, you're always supposed to try what first? What's the first thing you're supposed to try? What was that? What? Factoring by grouping. That's what you're always supposed to try first, factoring by grouping. Now, if you think, okay, 9, 3, 6, oh, maybe there's a multiple of 3. There's a 3, 3, 3. Oh, but there's no 3 over here. So 3 didn't work. So you're always supposed to try and factor out the GCF first, always. And you might be thinking, okay, maybe the 3 didn't work, but maybe there's x's. X, X, X. Wait a minute, there's no x over here, so that didn't work either. GCF doesn't work, but you're always supposed to try that first. Okay, anyways, GCF didn't work, so we're going to jump to factoring by grouping. Step 1, separate into 2 groups. So when we separate it into 2 groups, we'll have 9x squared minus 3xy space plus 6x minus 2y. Now let's take a look at our first group. Is there anything to pull out in our first group? Yes. What's in common? 3 and an x. Perfect. What would be left if I pull out a 3 and an x? 3x minus y. Correct? And now let's take a look at the second group. What could I pull out of the second group? And let's say, is it positive 2 or negative 2? Let's pull out a positive 2. And when we pull out that positive 2, what would be left on the inside? 3x minus 1y, or just y. Now, it's important that you decide whether it's positive 2 or negative 2, because sometimes you'll have like this, having opposite signs of this guy, then you would have to factor out a negative. We'll have some of those on the homework, but right here, factoring out a positive 2. Not only that, it's important to have the plus in front of there. That way it makes sense when you pull out what's in common. So let's move on to step 3, which is to take a step back and pull out what's in common from both groups. That's step 3. So let's take a step back and pull out what's in common from both groups. So here's your first group. Here's your second group. What's in common in both groups? The 3x minus y. So let me take this 3x minus y and this 3x minus y. Let me pull them out here into the front. Okay? Let me make this a little smaller. I want to pull out, like I said, the 3x minus y out in the front. And I would have my remaining terms on the inside of the parentheses, these exaggerated parentheses. So if I did pull out the 3x minus y, what would be left right here? 3x. And yeah, of course, if I took out the 3x minus y from over here, the plus 2 would be left over. So that's our final factored form. Let's just write it in the appropriate size. That would be 3x minus y, 3x plus 2. And if you wanted to double check your answer, all you have to do is distribute, and if there's anything you could combine, combine it, but you would end up with that exact answer. So I hope this helps. We're going to do another video, but that other video is going to be explaining something different. Right now, all we've been doing is factoring by grouping, using those steps right there. But even before factoring by grouping, we're always supposed to try factoring out the GCF. So factoring out the GCF is always first, try to pull out whatever's in common from all of your terms. And then if you can't find something in common in all your terms, especially if it's 4 terms or more, then you could try to do factoring by grouping. Later on in the future, we'll see that sometimes even factoring by grouping doesn't work. But that's what we're learning right now.